And you'd go, we've seen this coming. Shouldn't we have been doing something? I mean, Texas, you go down, it got really cold in Texas. Who thought it was going to get really cold in Texas? Well, people for decades have been saying we've got to do something about this. And surprise, when it got cold, we were unprepared. Out west, it's really freaking hot, unprepared. Not because we weren't forewarned, not because people weren't sounding the alarms that we need to upgrade our infrastructure, rewire stuff, do that. No. We've been told. It's just we have a failure of leadership from top to bottom. And finally, in a very small way, this infrastructure bill does some of that, nowhere near enough, not even close. Some of it. In fact, today it reported Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, was doling out some grant money to repair cracked bridges in Seattle because the crippling heat, expanding, ports, doing some things in Iowa, some stuff in Georgia to reduce greenhouse gas, looking with climate as a focus, kind of moving us in that direction, but also critical infrastructure that we need. And the jobs that we need with it. And it got me into one of these weird conversations today of, we can't do all those stuff because there's this invisible hand. And there are some among us who believe that we're powerless. We as working people are completely powerless. We're at the whim of the boss. We're at the whim of the government. Everybody's pushing us around. And I had this weird kind of conversation with somebody who was really fearful of everything now. It seems to me like, there have been a number of people I've come across recently, working people like me, who are like whipped dogs. And I know that's a horrible analogy, but it is. We're so skittish, so afraid, looking at everything, crazy like. And don't send me emails saying I'm advocating whipping dogs. I don't. I would rather whip the person who thought of whipping a dog. But the point I'm making is we've gotten to this point as working people where we're just skittish and afraid. And it got me into this frame of mind of how do we regain that empowerment? Because I don't understand someone who doesn't believe that their voice doesn't matter, that their thoughts don't matter, that somehow they're secondary. I'm struggling with that in this, especially in the workplace. Empowerment to me in the workplace has always been key, because if you feel that empowerment on the job, it's gonna carry over into other things. And how this conversation went is, I was explaining the powers of being a union member, the things that are contractually enforced. That people have the right to speak up when conditions are unsafe, when they feel something's wrong. They have the ability to have a voice, not just do what you're told. And I was explaining the difference between at-will employment and just cause discharge. Whereas in an at-will employment situation, you can be fired for anything at any time, as long as they don't violate a federal protected class. Like, they can't tell me you're an old guy. We hate old people. All you old people have to go. That would be a problem. That would be problematic for them, and something that probably shouldn't do. Just kind of a thought. But for any other reason, hey, you're wearing a black shirt today. Don't like black shirts. You're fired. That's perfectly legal. You figure it out. I can't. And I was explaining that in a union setting, you have a contract, and you can only be fired or disciplined or any of that for cause. You have to do something wrong. And this concept didn't sink into someone's head as I'm explaining that, you have the right to stand up for yourself. And they kept, well, won't they be mad? And I struggled with that, though. Won't they be mad? Well, aren't you mad? Aren't you mad that your safety's at risk? Aren't you mad that you're being cheated out of wages? Aren't you mad that you've been cheated out of breaks or overtime or whatever the issue is? Aren't you mad at that? At what point do we say, I'm fed up with it already? Enough. When do we grab that power? So when I got home and I started reading through some news, I came across this story I believe it's in Kansas, where the BCT GM the bakery workers, voted to strike at Frito-Lay. In fact, the vote was just overwhelmingly on the side of striking. It was like 353 to 30 that they voted to strike, and the response from the company was priceless. Really was, because they know we're afraid. They know we're beat down, or at least they believe that. But evidently, they've been negotiating for more than 9 months to reach an agreement. They've been negotiating 9 months to come up with an agreement. Seems lengthy. So the workers on Saturday voted to strike, and the company's response was priceless. They were shocked. They were shocked that the workers would call a strike, because the negotiations, the company said, were cordial. The union gave no indication that they weren't going to continue to put up with being pushed around and and in this situation where 9 months to get a contract. So they voted to go on strike, and that may happen on July 5th. We'll keep an eye on that. In fact, we're reaching out to folks now to see who we talk to. But it got me into this mindset that, how did we get from, a group of workers when I first started who were willing to shut stuff down, had strong backbones, had spines, empowered, to this kind of the pendulum of power has swung to the employer, to where they're shocked when workers, finally go, we've had enough. Shocked when the dog turns around and bites them. And, we're in this weird moment. And this is where this conversation then went. We're in a moment where this is the time workers should be grabbing the mantle of empowerment. They should be grabbing the power, because what do we hear every day? There's a labor shortage. We can't get people to come and work. This is the moment of your labor is most valuable at this moment. Your power to fold your arms and march your feet and not work is the ultimate power. And I've always said that. Those low-wage, crappy jobs in the service industry that weren't paying but minimum wage are now up to $12, $15 an hour. Why? Because they can't get people to do them. And what I was saying for the longest time is, your ability to say no is your power. Your ability to organize together and stop is your power. And this is playing out. This is a moment for mass organizing. This is a moment for people to say, we can make our lives better. And, we're seeing all these places. I see them all the time. I'm looking, because I'm always looking for jobs and always looking at what the employment picture is. And there are people out there offering, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 sign-on bonuses, especially in the trucking industry. There's one company locally that was offering like $15,000 for CDL drivers, because they can't seem to find any. I would argue, treat them better, make their lives livable, and you're going to get people to come to those jobs. But they're offering these big bonuses, and I'm like, we don't want bonuses. We want decent wages. We want good benefits. We want good conditions. I don't want a one-time bonus that's going to be I'm going to have it and then it's going to go away, and then over the next 10 years, I'm still working in the same crummy conditions with lower wages than I should. But this is one of those moments where, for the first time in decades, workers have some bit of power. And you'll get the Republicans saying, well, it's all because of Joe Biden and the unemployment insurance. And some of that's true. A little bit of it's true. A little bit of it's true that the rescue money that we needed to get through the pandemic gave people a little cushion. It's true that the unemployment that gave a little bit of boost, gave people a little bit of cushion so they can be a little choosier, which is what we want from an unemployment situation. We don't want desperate people taking poverty wage jobs and pulling us all down. We don't want that. We don't need it. We've had it for too long. Now we got a chance to change some of that. But they're screaming because, there are all these jobs they claim are open. Millions of these service sector jobs that again, don't pay reasonable wages with benefits that you can support a family on. Look, I'm a firm believer in work. I believe everybody should have to work, but I believe every job should be one that you're able to support yourself on. You're able to feed your family on. You're able to protect their health and your retirement. There should be something there. I'm not saying we're all going to be Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos. I don't want to make a killing. I just want to make a living. I want to make sure that if an emergency pops up, I can swing the $400 I'm going to need to take care of that. Where before the pandemic, more than 60% of people were not. So we're in this moment where, and I think this is a short moment. I think, the Republicans are doing everything they can in Republican states to pull back the unemployment, which is pushing people back into desperation situations. And down the road, once we get people desperate enough, once the cushion wears out and people can't be as choosy, you're going to start seeing wages come back down again. We've seen this play before. It's what's going on. And again, it's the reason that I'm a firm believer in union contracts and the stickiness of wages when you sign on the dotted line. But we have this moment. We have this moment to engage in real discussions about what kind of an economy do we want to have? What kind of a future do we want for working people? Now, I keep saying we need to pass something like the PRO Act. We need to get union organizing easier. We need to get workers the ability to join and form unions, much like my grandparents' generation did. Very easy. You sign a card, you begin negotiating. You don't get a contract, you go on strike, and you build community support around that. And I've always been a believer of when people are doing better, people are doing better. When you're doing better, eventually I'm going to do better, and conditions all rise. And I was talking about that as well to someone today about when I first started in the trucking industry. 85% of the LTL trucking industry was unionized, which meant the wages were significantly higher, and that other 15% that weren't unionized made almost the same wage. Now you have a completely upside down scenario where, well, those union companies are being pulled down because you have such non-union control of the industry. That has to be turned around. And it starts with bargaining. It starts with organizing. Now, what we're told is that they're just a bunch of lazy people. We got all these lazy people who refuse to work. And what we're finding out is that's not actually true. We're finding out that about a quarter of people are worried about COVID. They're still worried of getting COVID and waiting for the vaccine. We're finding about 20% are saying that they now have that financial cushion I was talking about. They got a little bit of money. They're doing okay. They're going to get through the next however long they can. Then they're going to get back to work. Around 12% are saying that it's unemployment. So for all of the rhetoric that we're getting out of the GOP about the lazy people and Biden's unemployment, they're saying about 12% are those folks. Childcare is another major factor that they point out. About 20% of low-wage workers are saying, look, I can't afford childcare. And again, these are issues that we can deal with. Now, is this a new era of worker power? Is this it? I think for the short period, yes. I think in the short run, there's an opportunity here. But I think long haul, if we don't get a massive infrastructure bill that's going to create more jobs, if we don't do the things that need to be done to boost employment and better employment, we're going to move back to a desperation situation where workers are going to be forced to take whatever's left. Right now, the economy doing really well. And if we can get something of a reasonable infrastructure bill, I think that carries us off into the next boom. But the question keeps coming back to, how are we, the working people, going to fare from that? Are we going to benefit from it? Are we going to be the ones who, at the end of it, say, hey, we made our lives better? Or is it going to be another opportunity for the wealthy to get wildly, wildly wealthy? While the rest of us are looking around going, well, we made it through, almost. This is where empowerment comes. This is where understanding the sense of the moment. Mass organizing right now to keep those wages where they are. Because trust me, the second corporate America decides that no more labor shortage, they're going to start clawing back all of that stuff, and with interest. Love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Stephen Greenhouse is going to be here to share some thoughts. Right back.
then workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On the Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. That was the day the state of Alabama outlawed the convict lease system that had been in practice for decades. Slave masters throughout the South had routinely loaned out enslaved people before slavery was finally abolished. The convict lease system continued this practice as the South worked to rebuild in a rush of rapid industrial growth after the Civil War. African Americans found themselves increasingly subject to sweeps by local and state authorities that coincided with harvest time or when labor agents arrived looking to man the coal mines. Many were convicted on trumped-up charges and shipped off to prison. Once there, they were leased to private industries and dispatched mostly to coal mines near Birmingham. By 1890, the state profited $164,000 a year. By 1912, prison mining brought in over $1 million in state revenues. In the PBS documentary, Slavery by Another Name, Douglas Blackman and other scholars note that prisoners could be driven in a way that earlier enslaved workers and free labor could not. Convict labor served to depress wages, curtail union activity, organizing, and strikes. These workers could also be worked practically to death and easily replaced. Progressive reformers, Socialist Party leaders, and United Mine Workers District 20 would wage an unrelenting war against the convict lease system for years. Even the 1911 Banner Mine explosion that killed 123 African American prisoners couldn't outlaw the practice. Finally, newly elected Governor Bibb Graves yielded to the public outcry that condemned the practice as a relic of barbarism. He also ceded to workers' demands for jobs. Graves subsequently put prisoners to work on chain gangs building roads throughout the state, making Alabama the last state to abolish the convict lease system.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You know, as I said, this is that moment where organizing is so important. If you remember last week, we talked with Randy Corrigan from the Teamsters Union. He's their organizer for Amazon. And as I said, you know, last week I said the same thing. This is the moment where there's a great opportunity to organize because they keep complaining there's a labor shortage. They're desperate for working people. There's an opportunity here to take advantage of the moment. And here to share some thoughts on the possibilities of that and also what we talked about with Randy Corrigan last week, organizing Amazon. I've asked Stephen Greenhouse to come talk with us. Stephen's a former New York Times labor reporter, one of the last in the country. He's also the author of numerous books on the state of labor. In fact, the most recent that I know of, Beaten Down, Worked Up, the Past, Present, and the Future of American Labor. Stephen, thanks for taking time for us.
Good to be back here, Rick.
So, you know, last week we had Randy on the program. Their goal is to organize Amazon after what we saw down in Alabama. Any hope you think there?
I think there's hope. I mean, I did two stories over the past week based on interviews with Randy Corrigan. And, you know, the Teamsters are a big, mighty union with a swaggering reputation. And despite the corruption of the past and despite the film Hoffa, a lot of workers, you know, who are eager for raises or eager for better benefits, they see the Teamsters and say, that is a fighting union. That's a union that delivers to its workers. You know, not all the times because companies are very, very tough in fighting back. But I think the Teamsters really register a lot of workers. They have more experience unionizing warehouse workers than any other union. But, and as you were saying before, Rick, this is a really ripe time for workers. A lot of workers are immensely pissed off in how they were treated during the pandemic. In my book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, I talk about how so many workers have felt beaten down in recent years, and they feel very worked up. They want to do something. So I think coming out of the pandemic, a lot of people are jazzed about unionizing, and with the election of Joe Biden, who is really the most pro-union president probably since Roosevelt, I think it's a really good opportunity for workers. But as you've often talked about in your show, you know, corporations are not going to roll over. Corporations are going to continue fighting as hard as they can to stop workers from unionizing. So the big question is whether the mighty Teamsters can somehow figure out a way to overcome mighty Amazon's very powerful anti-union efforts.
Yeah, full disclosure, I've been a Teamster for 33 years. And as I say all the time, I wish everyone had the same kind of wages, hours, and conditions that I was able to support my family on and get through, because the National Master Freight Agreement, which I worked under all of my career, has built family-sustaining wages and jobs out of what were basically sweatshop conditions when my grandparents walked the world. So there is a way forward.
In my book, Rick, I explained that, once upon a time, jobs in auto plants were horrible jobs. People worked insane hours. It was incredibly dangerous. But thanks to the United Auto Workers and their power and their strikes, they turned those lousy, dangerous jobs into good jobs that pay very good wages with very good benefits. That doesn't mean the jobs might not still be monotonous, but for the hard work you do, you get very good benefits, good wages with safety. And when I interviewed Randy Corrigan last week, he pointed out something that I tweeted about and went totally viral. He said the typical Amazon driver in Southern California makes $16 an hour. And Randy told me that back in 1996, 25 years ago, unionized UPS drivers in Southern California are making $20.50 an hour. That's already $4.50 more than Amazon drivers, and that was 25 years ago. And now Randy told me unionized UPS drivers in Southern California make $38 an hour compared to the $16 that Amazon workers make, plus unionized drivers make another $20 an hour in benefits. So if you're looking for an argument to persuade Amazon folks why you should unionize, it's hard to find a better argument than that.
No, and what it is, and this is what Randy and I spoke about as well, is that, this has to happen because Amazon is pulling everybody down. Every warehouse job, every delivery job, all of these, in the freight jobs in the industry that I'm working in, it pulls everything down because it creates these low-wage jobs that desperate people need, and they exploit the desperate and ended up pulling everybody else down. So if the Teamsters can't organize the package drivers and the delivery drivers, it's going to be bad news for the rest of the industry and for transportation as a whole.
Absolutely. And if anyone can do it, the Teamsters can do it. I think the Teamsters would be smart to ally themselves or team up with other unions and with community groups, African-American groups, immigrant groups, environmental groups, whatever. I think people see, millions of people see how workers are being squeezed and screwed in many ways, and they want to help unions. And the approval rate of unions is the highest it's been in like 50 years. And the Teamsters would be smart, just as the teachers are very smart in their strikes in West Virginia and Arizona and Chicago and LA to go forward with strong community support, because it's much easier for unions to win that way. Workers are much more willing to stick their necks out and support a union and go on strike if they know that their neighbors, that their community is behind them.
And this is where, we had talked about it. When I talk about all the time, we've got to rebuild this culture of unionism to where, you may never be a union member, but you want to support people to have that voice on the job, to bargain for those better wages, hours, and conditions, because you understand it's going to benefit you as well. That when you're that rising tide lifting all boats thing, that analogy actually working in this way, instead of when the rising tide comes up, the billionaire's boat crushes your dinghy into the dock. That which was what we've been living under. But to me, it's that what Randy talked about is that wraparound, how we pull in community groups, as you've said, how we pull in the community, your neighbors, and make this kind of like my grandparents' generation were able to do. I mean, I think back to the stories my grandfather told me of the organizing and look, holding people accountable. I tell the story all the time of when I moved in with my grandparents, he said, "Don't you ever go over to that guy's house and play with his grandkids. I don't want to ever see you over there, or I'll whip your behind." And a couple of years later, I go, "What was that about?" Turns out that guy crossed a picket line 50 years beforehand, and he never forgave him. It's that kind of culture and that kind of accountability I think we have to return to.
I agree. So, I wrote this book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, and one of the main reasons my publisher, who's a good progressive, my editor is a good progressive guy, said, you should write a book, Steve. And I covered labor for the New York Times, 18 years. You should write a book, Steve, that explains, the benefits of worker power, the benefits of unions. And in my book, I really try to walk readers through how conditions are terrible for garment workers, early in the 20th century in the U.S. Conditions are horrible for auto workers. Conditions are really tough for truck drivers. And I explained how the formation of unions really lifted hundreds of thousands, millions, tens of millions of workers by workers banding together, by sticking their necks out, by forming unions, by pressuring companies. American companies were usually prosperous after World War II, and they weren't very eager to share their huge profits, sounds like today. And it was really the strength of unions, through strikes like the Flint sit-down strike, and the strength of the great union based in Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, the United Steelworkers, that pressured humongously powerful and profitable companies like General Motors and Ford Motor Company, United States Steel and Bethlehem Steel, to share much more of their profits with workers. And that really played a pivotal role, as I explain in my book, in building the middle class. Then later in the 1970s and 80s, when workers were finally doing well in the United States, there was this huge counteroffensive led by corporations. They started hiring, gazillions of, anti-union consultants and anti-union lawyers, and that was really helped, as I explain in my book, by Ronald Reagan's crushing of the strike by the air traffic controllers. And now, there's been a much more sophisticated fight by corporations against unions in the U.S., and unions now have gotten better at fighting back. So we're in this tug of war, but as we discussed, Rick, workers are really feeling frustrated. They see the stock market at record levels. They see huge tax cuts for the rich, and they're saying, what about us? We want our share. And I think that's one of the reasons Biden won, is that, he's Scranton Joe. He's a pro-union guy. He visits firefighters, and he really talks. He walks the walk and talks the talk to help union workers. And I think workers unions see a real opportunity. It would, of course, again, as you talked about on your show, it would really help to enact the PRO Act, but it would take, as many of your listeners know, it will take probably 60 votes in the Senate to get that enacted unless we get rid of the filibuster, and that might be hard to do. So I think the Biden administration is doing, all it can, even without the PRO Act, to make it easier to unionize.
Right. But here's the thing, and this is where I go back to. I don't necessarily even care about the PRO Act, because you talked about the Flint sit-down strike, some of the things that my grandparents' generation did. Those weren't legal. We didn't ask. It wasn't Mother May I. As a society, we demanded, and this is where I keep coming back to this sense of empowerment that the working class of this country has forgotten. I had a conversation with a worker today who, when I was explaining the difference between at-will employment and just cause employment, the person asked me, won't the boss be upset? And I'm going, I don't care about that. We have a contract. We enforce a contract. You should be happy that we have that and not caring about that. But we've become this society that we now care what the boss thinks, and we're willing to be cheated out of wages. We're willing to be put in desperate conditions and dangerous conditions. I say we need to return to some bit of militancy, to where we're standing up for ourselves and saying, we're not taking it anymore.
I mean, Rick, I totally agree. Increased militancy will help. But, during the Flint sit-down strike, unions and workers had, there was much more community solidarity, because so many people during the Depression were poor, were beaten down. And so the Flint sit-down strikers, when they sat in at some key General Motors plants in 1936, 37, and won and got the biggest company in the world to agree to recognize the union, that was a humongous victory. And it was very important that they had big community support, and government leaders even supported them in many ways.
Right.
Now, and don't think that the Flint sit-down strikers weren't scared, but they knew they had a lot of community support. They had a lot of solidarity. They were confident that the Michigan governor would back them. Now, yes, more militancy would help, but I think people are more scared that there's not as much, community solidarity behind unions. Yes, the teachers are very smart when they went on strike in West Virginia and Oklahoma and Arizona. They first made sure that they had a lot of community support. So, yes, there should be more worker militancy, more union militancy, but I think before you rush out to do that, you really got to make sure you have strong community support and hopefully strong backing from government leaders, or else, the man might really crack down on you and you get arrested or get fired. So, people forget, sorry, one more thing. West Virginia teacher strike was totally illegal. And the teachers basically said, I dare you, Republican Governor Justice, who happened to be the richest human being in the state of West Virginia, I dare you to arrest us or crack down on us, because they knew that if they were arrested, the SH would really hit the fan.
Yep.
And that people would humongously support them. So if you have your ducks in a row, if you have strong solidarity and strong community support, you could really be more militant.
I see that as you pointed out, General Motors at the time was the largest employer in the world. Now you've got Amazon, who is the behemoth at this time, and I think if you have a concerted campaign, I think a lot of people are afraid of their growth. I think when you tell people that they spent $200 million fighting back an organizing campaign, that makes them think twice. I think there's a moment here. At least I hope there's a moment here where we're seeing organizing, especially in places like New York or Washington, states that still have strong union density to this day. I'm still hoping that that's possible.
I hope you're right. So, I did a story about an effort to unionize the Amazon warehouse, the used Amazon warehouse in Staten Island, the borough of New York. I live in Manhattan. But I think a lot, like when Flint, Michigan workers went on strike, everyone in Flint knew about the GM plant. Everyone in Flint had friends or sons or parents who worked at the plant. I think in theory, a lot of people are pissed off at Amazon and how Amazon treats its workers. But on the other hand, Rick, a lot of people love Amazon because it sends them lots of stuff really cheap. So I think, again, if you're going to do a mass action on Amazon, and again, the Teamsters get this. When you talk to Randy Corrigan, I'm sure he told you the same thing, that they're going to really try to build strong community support, because that will, put pressure on Amazon. If the Teamsters could really get a lot of people to say, I'm going to boycott Amazon, for a month or 2 months, unless you agree to neutrality, unless you agree not to fight a union, that could make a real difference. But it takes organizing, solidarity.
No, you're right. And it takes messaging. I mean, at the end of this, there are so few programs like this one that talks about this from a perspective of workers. We've done not a great job of having microphones to lift up the voices of working people and the concerns of average everyday working people. So as I tell my friends at the Teamsters and other places, you've got to get out there and tell those stories. The Amazon organizing campaign, I think, did pull back the cover on a lot of things. The fact that Amazon at that place had 100% turnover, the fact that you had drivers having to go to the bathroom in bags because they couldn't get breaks, the fact that you had in the bathrooms anti-union stuff plastered everywhere. When we hear those stories, I think people get angry, and we need more information, not less.
No, I agree. So on one hand, yes, the retail wholesale department store union lost badly when it sought to unionize the Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama. But on the other hand, in ways, that was just kind of a first step that it was in some ways a victory, because it achieved some very important things. It got the whole nation, the whole world to focus far more on how stressful and arduous and in ways bad and unsafe Amazon jobs are. And as you pointed out, Rick, people realize, hey, turnover at Amazon is huge because workers are, just feel so beaten down, so beaten up by their jobs, they're leaving. And another big step forward in that Amazon fight in Alabama was it really shined a light on how humongously anti-union Amazon is and how unfair the playing field is, that when workers seek to organize, that employers have huge advantages compared with the union. So I explained in my book, when workers seek to organize a private company, the employer has access 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to the workers. It could show videos in the lunchroom, videos in the break room, put videos on computer screens, whatever. And under American law, companies have the right to prohibit union organizers from even setting foot into the company parking lot. They can get arrested. And companies have these captive audience meetings, these required meetings for workers to listen to propaganda, and many companies even take down a pro-union, flyer that's on the bulletin board inside the plant. So, one of the good things about the PRO Act is it will help level the playing field so that it's not so easy for companies to defeat unionization efforts.
Yeah, we got a lot of work to do. The book, Beaten Down, Worked Up, The Past, Present, and Future of American Labor, written by Stephen Greenhouse, former New York Times labor reporter. Stephen, I hope folks take a look at the book. We'll get links out on social media. But great talking with you. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Great you're going to be on WBAI in New York. Congrats.
Yes, looking forward to it. Okay. Thanks so much. Our good friend Stephen Greenhouse. Again, the book, Beaten Down. Make sure you take a look at it. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1885. That was the day that streetcar workers went out on strike. The West Division Street Railroad Company had reduced the number of trips it made each day. The workers asked for a wage increase to make up for the loss of earnings. In response, management fired 15 union leaders. Outraged members of the city's labor movement rallied to the cause of the West Side Streetcarmen's Benevolent Association. Thousands of Chicagoans lined the company's tracks. Calls went out to revoke the company's charter. Mayor Harrison urged the company not to try and run their cars in the charged environment. But the company's management refused to listen. They demanded police protection to get their streetcars running. A police captain by the name of John Bonfield was assigned the task. Bristling with policemen, 10 streetcars rolled out into the crowd. Under Bonfield's orders, the police clubbed strikers and protesters along the tracks. When a group of bricklayers yelled "rats" at the passing cars, they were arrested. In all, 150 protesters went to jail that day. After 7 days, the strike ended in a compromise. The workers saw an increase in their wages, and all but 2 of the workers who had been fired got their jobs back. The action propelled Captain Bonfield's career as a strikebreaker. He became known as Captain Blackjack Bonfield. It was Captain Bonfield who led the police confrontation with workers at a rally the next year that sparked the Haymarket tragedy. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Like us on Facebook and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History was 1875. That was the day anti-black violence erupted into a 2-day massacre in Clinton, Mississippi. As many as 2,500 black Republicans and their families met at
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
The day was one of festivity. I couldn't get over the headlines today of all of the horrible things
the County
happening
Republican
out
Party
in the
invited
Pacific
local
Northwest.
Democrats to debate.
Literally,
the Democratic
cables
state
melting.
senatorial candidate
Did you see the
address
video
the crowd.
of the street
The
or the
editor
picture
of
of
a
the street
local
that just-
Republican
it just
newspaper
buckled.
and
I mean,
union
not
officer
in a little
Captain
way,
H.
but like
T.
you could jump
Fisher
ramps.
followed him.
When I was a
Soon
kid, I'd
a
have loved to
group
have
of
that
white
street on my
Democrats
street
began to
corner. 'Cause
heckle
you could have jumped
Fisher
your bike
as he
for
spoke.
hours
Republican
on that.
politicians
Now, granted, you're not going to get a
attempted to
car
quell
over
the
it,
growing
and you've just
tension.
boogered up traffic
Almost
for
immediately, however,
ever
the
now.
heckling whites opened
But it
fire
was fun
on
for
the
the
crowd.
kids, so
Women
maybe there
and
is a
children
positive
fled in all
to disaster
directions
capitalism,
as black
maybe
Republican
destroying the
forces
environment
rushed
and
to
not
defend
having an
themselves
infrastructure capable
and their
of
families.
withstanding
By the end of the day,
the
3
future.
whites
Maybe
and
it's a good thing
5
for
blacks
kids.
were
A little
killed.
fun.
Clinton's mayor fed
although
off
it sounds
rumors
kinda
of
ridiculous,
black
that's the
retaliation.
sad reality
He called
of
upon
what our
white
lawmakers
paramilitary
seem to
forces,
think.
the white liners,
We
from
can't seem to
surrounding
get
areas
stuff
for assistance.
done, and here to share some
Several
thoughts on
hundred
the
answered
buckling
the call
streets and
filled the
the
town's
liquefied
streets. Historian
electricity
Melissa
lines. I've asked Mike
Jankowski
Williams to
Jones
come talk with us.
that though
Mike
heavily
is a
armed,
senior fellow
the
there at the
white
Center for
liners
American
accompanied
Progress.
white locals as they
AmericanProgress.org, their
rampaged
website.
door to door
Mike, thanks for making
looking
time
for
for us.
black Republicans to murder.
Anytime,
After
Rick.
2
It's my
days,
pleasure to
as
be here.
many as
So,
50
have you seen
black
this picture of the
Clintonians
buckled
were
road?
killed by white Democrats
Seen
looking
it.
to
Yeah,
end Reconstruction
it's on my
and
Twitter
regain
feed. It's come
political
up at least
control of
4,
Mississippi. A
8
Senate
times.
committee would later
That,
conclude, quote, the
the
riots
buckled
at
road,
Clinton
the melted,
were part of a special
streetcar
purpose on the
cable,
part of the Democrats to break up the meetings
pictures
of
of
Republicans
satellite views
and
of British
inaugurate
Columbia.
an era
It's
of terror, not
horrifying.
only in those communities, but
thought
throughout
look,
the state.
I looked at the
Like
Buckle
what you
Street.
hear,
Wouldn't that
check
be
out
fun when you
more
were a
at
kid? Didn't you jump ramps when you were a
laborhistoryinstitute.com.
kid on your
You
bike?
are listening to the best of the Rick
course.
Smith Show.
Kind
If
of
you
yeah.
have any thoughts, any questions, any comments, we'd love to hear it. You can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks for tuning in.
In their road bike racing, but the rest of us, it's going to create disasters.
Yeah.
Thanks so
And
much
it's
for tuning in.
I think
Today on
it's
the big program,
time
lots to get to,
to
lots
finally
to talk
absorb
about.
the fact
Labor
that the
Day
climate
weekend.
crisis is not some far
Everyone is
off
having a
thing.
healthy,
It's here.
happy, safe,
And it's only going to get
reflective
worse unless we do
holiday.
something about
To
it.
me, this is one of the
And
big,
as you've said
the big
before,
holidays
and we've talked
for
about
me.
before, this is an
It's a
infrastructure
moment for me
problem,
to look back
and it requires
on all
significant
of those
solutions to
people
our
and all of those
infrastructure.
stories.
No,
and
I mean,
all of the
you think about,
sacrifice, the
we've talked
struggle
for
of
years
workers
about
before
earthquakes
us.
in California. We
the
can
people
do
who
something
fought,
about
bled,
that
and died
a
for the
little bit.
weekend,
We can
for
build
vacation,
infrastructure that can
to end
withstand
child labor abuses,
certain degrees
to
of
make safe
earthquakes.
workplaces,
We could have
to
certainly,
ensure that we have maximum
stopped what
hour
happened
laws,
in
minimum
Texas
wage laws,
had we just had
to
a little
ensure
vision and
that
foresight.
workers have a voice
And I
on
think,
the
with the
job.
infrastructure
Those
problems we're
little
seeing in
things
the Pacific
that we
Northwest,
seem
we
to
can do some of this
take
stuff.
for granted.
But more importantly, I think we got to deal with the issue of
idea that there
climate
was
change
a fight
and
for the
help
8-hour
stop
day
it getting any
away from the
worse
sun up to
before the
sundown
rest of our
workday.
infrastructure goes down.
People ran under the
Yeah,
banner
that's
of 8
exactly
hours
right,
for
Rick.
work,
You know,
8
there's
hours for
two
rest,
wonky
and
words
8
that people
hours
use
for
when it
what
comes to
we
dealing with
will.
climate change.
The
There's
idea that
mitigation,
life
and then
is
there's
about
resilience.
more than
So
just
mitigation,
toil
that means
and
stopping
struggle
doing
and work
what's
to make
creating
the
the
boss
problem.
profit.
So let's
What a novel concept.
greatly
Maybe
limit or
one-
stop
maybe
pollution
one we
right
can
now
rediscover
so that
today.
we stop making it
Because the
worse.
sad
That's
reality
mitigation.
is-
That's a pretty
And we
critical
see
one that needs
this
to happen
playing
now.
out year
And then
after
there's
year.
resilience.
As
And that
union
means
density
preparing
declines,
our infrastructure
as
systems
the number of
and our
people
social
joining and
systems
forming unions,
to be able to
as the
handle
number
the
of
impacts
workers
of the climate
carrying
crisis.
contracts
That
and
is
union
something where
cards
we're like, where we had
declines,
said, for years,
well,
we need
the
to
wealth
prepare and
taken
do
by
this
the
eventually.
1%
Not anymore. We need that
increases.
now, right now. And you're right. We can set
for
up the
them,
systems in the Pacific
less
Northwest,
for us.
on the West
More
Coast
for
to
the
deal with wildfires, to make sure
capital
that
class,
we're
less for the
we're dealing
laboring
with our
class.
forests. We're
They used to call that
building our
redistribution
infrastructure
of wealth.
so that
And
it
what
can
we're
handle
seeing
heat
is a
waves. We're making
massive
sure that people have
redistribution of wealth,
places to
especially during
go
the Trump
during
era.
these massive
'Cause you
heat waves,
remember,
community
he
cooling
ran
centers,
on the idea that he was
proper
going to be the
water
great
situations,
working
an electric
class
grid
hero.
that can handle it. I don't know if
He
you
was
saw,
actually
but
going to
just
make
a little
wages
while
better.
ago, an emergency alert went
And
out
yet
to
you
all of
look
New
at
York
the
City,
Trump wages.
and it was a conserve energy
You
alert.
look at
And it's
what
never
is
happened,
actually
not
happened
like this, and
under
not
his
because of a
tutelage.
heat wave like this.
And it's not
Saying
good.
that you can't
Corporate
use or you
profits
should not
way through
use
the roof.
appliances that
Wages,
use a lot of
not
energy
just
because they're
deadlining,
worried about
but
blackouts and
declining.
brownouts because of this lingering
and that comes back to
disaster of a
this
heat
idea.
wave.
And
We
I
need
know
an
we've
energy
heard
grid that's
this
not from the
before.
1960s and 70s. We need
The
one
idea that
from the
there's a
2020s and the one that's going to help us go
invisible
further.
hand.
So it's an
That
infrastructure
this invisible
problem.
hand, as
It
unemployment
just
goes
requires us to
down,
invest
as the number of
in our
jobs
infrastructure.
increases,
But here
that
again,
there's this
whenever these
competition, the invisible
catastrophes
hand
happen,
immediately raises
and I
wages.
go back to when Ohio
And that
and
through competition,
parts of New
we get
York and
wage
I
increases.
think Michigan, two parts of Michigan,
while in
we
some
had a
industries
blackout for
that's
weeks.
true, the vast
We were
majority
saying, hey, we need to rebuild our infrastructure, and they
The
did some
reason you
patchwork
had
to make sure
factory
everything
workers,
got
truck
up and running
drivers,
again.
and retail
But we didn't
workers
really
and
make
fast
that
food
total
workers,
investment and
and
that
go down the
commitment
list,
to
street
actually make
sweepers
sure it never happens again.
Anybody
When
punches a
bad
clock,
Houston,
the reason their
did we
lives got
have we
better
fixed the problem
is
that
because they
caused
banded
the
together
entire area to
and
shut down? No,
demanded
we put a Band-Aid
better
on it.
wages,
And this is
better
my
hours,
problem with
better
everything that we
They
do. We
demanded
put a
it.
Band-Aid on it
Nothing
and say,
was
oh, look,
given.
we did something, but we're never
And on this
doing
Labor
the
Day holiday,
things
I think back to my work
that push the bounds of technology.
during
This
our radio
country,
show,
when
I talk
my
an awful lot
grandparents'
about my
generation were
upbringing. I grew up
roaming
in a
the
housing
earth,
project on the
we
west side
pushed
of
the
Cleveland.
bounds of
I like
Cape
to say
possible. We don't seem
were
to be
living on
doing
the
that because
land,
we've
but they put
privatized
the
most everything,
socioeconomic
and now
ladder
it's
on
all
top
about
of
the
it.
money and who can make what
by
off
American
what.
standards, we were dirt poor.
Yeah, but here's the thing.
And out of
President
that,
Biden actually put forward a plan
I
that
was
would
able to
actually
work hard,
get us
play by
a
the
whole
rules,
long
and
way
actually get
towards
ahead.
doing this comprehensively. The American Jobs Plan.
My
It's a
children will
massive,
never see the
comprehensive
desperation, the
investment
poverty, the
in our
violence,
nation's infrastructure
the
that
inhumanity
puts
demand
dealing with
that
the
I
climate
grew up
crisis
seeing.
at the
And why
forefront.
is that?
It's
Well, because
a
I worked
great
hard,
plan.
I
It's the
played
best one
rules,
we've seen from any sitting
But
president.
because I had one of
And that's why
a union
we can't
contract.
dither, we can't
This
dilly-dally,
contract
we
lays
can't
out
accept
exactly how much I'm going to get
defeat
paid,
from Captain
what my wages
Obstruction,
are,
Mr.
what my hours
McConnell.
are, what my conditions are,
We have
what
to pass
my
the
healthcare
whole
benefits
package
are,
of the
what
American
my
Jobs Plan,
retirement
because it's exactly what you
requirements are.
said, Rick.
And, oh, by the
We
way,
need that
what
whole piece.
work
We can't
rules
have
we have
Band-Aids.
that the
And we
company
can't
and
have Band-Aids for the
employee
sake of
agreed to in a
bipartisanship.
contract.
We need actual
Written down like
solutions, and
every
we need them
CEO
right
has
now.
one.
and the American Jobs Plan is there. And the
with
other
this
thing too is
contract
it's not like this
comes
is
my
some
union card.
strenuously
Never
controversial
leave home without it.
idea.
What's in your wallet? Better
Polls have
be a
shown
damn
over and
union
over
card.
again the American Jobs Plan
And I
is
think back to the
overwhelmingly
day-
popular.
I think back to the day I
Overwhelmingly
picked this
popular,
card up.
not just by Democrats or by
April
independents,
24th,
but also by
1989.
Republicans.
I
Everybody
was a kid.
really supports the
out of
idea
college.
of massive,
Broke.
comprehensive investments in our nation's
No
infrastructure,
job prospects.
our nation's manufacturing, our nation's research and development,
I got a
and
job working
putting
for a trucking
forward
At the time,
the
paid
idea of
$15
solving the
an hour.
climate crisis and
Healthcare
putting forward
benefits,
issues
the
of
best
justice
money could buy.
at the center
Retirement
of the whole thing.
security.
It's
once
a
you got
great
to a
plan
certain
and
number of
one
hours during
we
that
need
quarter.
Congress to pass.
Oh,
No, absolutely.
Yesterday.
As I've been saying, it's visionary. I mean, we need visionary leadership, and it rises to that. And I'll be honest, Joe Biden was not my first
Fast
choice for
forward all
president.
these years, nearly
He
30
was probably
years.
fourth, maybe fifth. And I
That
think the
exact
American people
job,
made the right
same
choice.
job,
I look back at it. My
$14
fear
an
was
hour,
this was
so
going to be
no
Obama
one
2.0, and we were going to get a lot of half
$18
measures.
an hour top.
The fact that he has come out with big, bold, visionary
those 30
plans
years,
like
wages
this one
have not just
is
stagnated,
I'll be
they've
honest,
declined.
is
For working people
kind of
all
surprising to
across
me,
this country. So if you
but
wonder
really well
why
welcomed.
people are angry.
Yeah. I
It's
will freely admit,
getting much
someone in the
harder.
same boat, but I've
Much harder
been
to make ends
quite
meet.
pleased at the visionary leadership that we've
There
seen
was
from the
just a study done
administration.
the other day
I'm not normally
that
the
said
type of
that,
person who will just
it's
crow
between
about
20
political leaders. You know,
50%
political leaders are
more
humans. They're
expensive
put in
now
charge.
to
We
be
put
in the
them
middle
there,
class
and
than
you
it
know, we
was
want
30
to
years
keep
ago.
them honest. But the leadership we're
Because
seeing from
inflation
this
has gone up,
administration has
the
been
cost of
really,
living has gone up,
really
the cost of
positive.
housing, food,
But we
gasoline,
need
clothes
it
for
to
the kids,
continue.
shoes,
Exactly,
We need
but-
Congress to
They've
meet
all
the
gone up.
moment. too.
Absolutely. That's the thing. We got to meet this moment because literally
Wages.
the streets are buckling. So I'm looking
Why
at this
is-
$1.2 billion
why is
or
it
trillion
that
dollar
wages have stagnant for 30
infrastructure
years?
plan,
Now, a lot of
which
people will say, well, Rick,
it
you
appears Republicans don't really want to pay for. So you go, I don't know where the money's coming from. But there's some stuff in there as well that I'm not fond
All
of on
those
the
things play a
privatization
part.
angle. That we're gonna because how are
But
we
the
going to pay
biggest
for it if we're not then giving it away to
biggest reason
corporate
is we've
America?
seen a
That's kind of a concern to me that we're
enormous
going to do half
redistribution
measures
of
to make
wealth away
people
from
wealthy
people who work
and not really get us what
and
we
create
need.
that wealth.
Yeah,
with
no,
the
we
sweat
can't,
of their brow
and just
and
the
the ache of
scale of
their
it. You said
back
1.2
and
trillion,
the-
Rick. I just
the
want to clarify.
damage to their body
The
and their
new
mind
spending
and
in that
their
bipartisan
hands
is around
to the
570
people who,
billion.
well, they
That's
changed
like
money
what,
from
an
one
eighth
pocket to the
of what the American Jobs Plan was, even
And it's
less than
borne
that.
out.
Right.
We need
It's borne
it's
out right
way smaller.
in this very simple
Again, for the
graph.
sake of bipartisanship.
As
And to your point,
union
it's
density
in
goes
terms of
down,
paying for
the
it.
amount
The
of
American
wealth
Jobs Plan and the
goes
administration laid out
to
some
the top
really good
1%,
ideas
it goes
about
up.
bringing the tax code up
It
to
isn't
a
hard
point
to
of
figure out
more fairness, not even full
that
fairness,
the
more
lower
fairness
wages workers
than what
the
it
less
currently is
healthcare
and what
that they
the
get,
previous
the less
administration
retirement
did.
security they
So,
get,
and the notion
more
of
corporate
privatizing
profits
parts of the
and
infrastructure,
dividends
that's
go up.
potentially really problematic. We've seen places when
Pretty
public-private
simple.
partnerships are used to bust unions. That is not okay.
And,
We've seen
you know,
places
I think
where
about on this
privatization
all
of
holy holidays,
utilities and other
the people who
useful
came
systems in
before,
our throughout our
I'm very
infrastructure
fortunate.
have done
I got
damage
to
to the
meet some
environment.
of the
So
people who
we have to
fought
avoid that. This is a
on
big
the picket line.
public
People who
crisis.
literally
The issue of
fought,
climate
bled,
change is a
and
public
died
crisis. The issue of inequality
for
is
the
a public
things that
crisis.
we take for
The
granted
issue
today.
of just broad injustice,
People who
racial
built
injustice
this
and such
contract,
is a
the
public
National
crisis.
Master Freight Agreement,
It needs
which
public
was one of the most
solutions,
powerful
public dollars.
contracts in the
It's
entire
time
country,
for this country to
covering
truly step up
tens
and
of
do
thousands
this.
of
And so
employees
again, you know,
across this nation,
the
raising
construct
living
of the
standards
bipartisan agreement
for
as a
all
first
workers.
step, sure, it can be good. And if
Covering
that
an
helps
entire
bring
industry of
people
truck drivers.
along,
Brought
fine,
them
as
out
a
of
first
poverty.
step, but it has to
My
be
grandfather told
in
stories of how he started
congruence,
on the back
in
of a coal truck
connection,
shoveling coal off the
deeply
back of a coal
interwoven
truck for
with that
17 cents
next
an hour.
piece, or even
And how by
let's
the
not even
time
say
he
next piece,
retired,
right? The piece that goes right with it,
The standard of
through
living that
through
his
reconciliation
union
to make sure that we
built for him
pass the rest
and
of
my
the
grandmother
investments to solve the climate
was
crisis,
second to none.
to rebuild America's
They
infrastructure,
retired in their
and to
home
do
that
it
they
and
paid
putting
for
people back to work.
with
One
dignity
final
and
thing,
respect, with a defined benefit
we need to
pension,
make sure that when we're spending these
with
investments,
savings,
that we're
and with
rebuilding
healthcare.
transit systems, rebuilding schools, the energy
The next
grid,
generation
that we're
say
doing
that
so
they're going to have
in a
the
way
same
that creates high
opportunities
quality
that they-
jobs,
my
union
grandparents
jobs. That
And you know
requires
why?
some decent basic standards,
It's because we're
paying
not
people
fighting
for
for those
prevailing wages, ensuring
not
that we're buying
demanding
domestically
those
made
things.
steel
I'm
and
sorry,
cement,
no such thing as
and a few other pieces that are really important. Utilizing people who've gone through apprenticeship
in this
programs.
book,
Stuff that makes sure that the people who are building our bridges are skilled, are trained well, and that they make a good living, because that supports communities.
Died on picket lines
We
to make
we
sure
have
that,
to make sure that happens as well.
they and future
That's all
generations
included in the American
earned a
Jobs
decent
Plan.
wage. You know
So
what's
it's
happened
laid
over
out
the
there.
years,
But again, I worry if we
as
just
corporatists have taken over our
dilly-dally with a
government,
bipartisan dance,
as
will we
neoliberals
lose
have
those
destroyed
standards
our
too?
trade
Yeah, and the other thing
companies
that
and
I have to
attacked
throw in as well, and
regulations.
everything was spot on, the
What have we
Buy-American
gotten for it?
provisions, because if
We've gotten
we
poverty.
need steel
We've
for
gotten
bridges,
desperation.
it should be
And,
produced here.
well,
We
an
shouldn't be getting the
enviable
cheap stuff from
billionaire
China, and most certainly we shouldn't be
have
bringing
the
in Chinese
wealthiest
welders.
billionaire class
We've seen
in
that movie.
history
It didn't
of
work out
civilization.
well out in
We truly do.
California. I don't want to see that
We've
again.
created more
But here's the
billionaires
thing, there are
any
people saying,
point
well, like
in
you
the
said,
history
we'll
of
get
this
that,
country.
we'll get the bipartisan deal, and then we'll get the other deal.
We've done it through
My
lower
fear
wages,
is we get
less
none of it,
healthcare,
because
and, well,
you've got
no
Republicans who are
retirement
going to block one part of the
Not to
bipartisan
mention,
deal, or you get some Democrats who are saying, no, it's not enough,
crumbling
and we don't get
infrastructure.
either of them, and we end up in
Generations
this
saddled with
situation
massive
where at
debt
the end
for
of
student
the
loans.
summer, we're looking at
A
each other
prison
going,
population
we didn't do
that is
anything on the
being,
climate issue.
just built for profit.
You're right to be worried, Rick.
And yet,
I
still
try
hear
to be,
people
and I
say,
often am, maybe a little
unions
too
are
optimistic. I still have hope and optimism
I live not
that
too
we can
far
get
from
this right.
the place
The
where
American
Iraq
Rescue
was
Plan
massacred.
went through pretty unscathed
Pennsylvania is rich
earlier in the year. I think we
in
forget
blood
how amazingly quick
of labor martyrs
Congress
who were
moved,
fighting
and they
for a
moved
better
at the
opportunity
scale
for
that we
tomorrow.
needed, which was it's still somewhat
Not too far from
jaw-dropping
here,
to
the
say that.
Latimer
That
massacre
Congress
happened.
acted in the manner in which they needed to
A
at the moment,
sheriff deputized
amazingly
a bunch
enough.
of thugs.
And kudos
I'm
to
not gonna
them.
call them
Kudos to the
sheriffs
majority
because
leader.
they were
Kudos to the
deputized,
speaker
but they were gun
for
thugs.
getting that done. Kudos
They were
definitely to the
handed
president.
Winchester rifles.
I still think we
And
can
as
do
these
this
men were
this
strung-
summer
were
on
marching
infrastructure.
from Allentown
If we need to do a
to
dance,
Scranton,
let's do the
they were met
dance,
in
but
ladders,
let's make sure in the end we get the
where
whole
these gun
thing
thugs
done.
Yeah, see, I'm in the place where it should have been done already. It should have gone through
Yeah.
as fast as the rescue plan
One
went
of the
through,
miners
because
was
look, you
carrying
have
American
you have
flag.
some
That
bit
was
of
the
power.
weapon
You need to
that he
use it.
had. His
Because
beloved
for me,
American
the
flag.
political
He
part of this
believed
is
that
if we
flag,
don't get this
which stood
done,
for
if you're
liberty,
not creating
freedom,
better
and
infrastructure,
opportunity,
better
that's what he
jobs,
was
if you're
told
not
when he came
making
to this
people's
country.
lives better, you're going to take a
When the
beating
coal
in
companies
22.
brought him here for cheap
The other
labor,
part of
they
me
told
is
him,
if you
"Stick
don't get
to labor
anything
code.
done
You work
as
hard,
a
you
nation,
should.
play by the
as a
rules, you get
nation,
ahead."
we're going to be
He
worse
believed
off.
that,
We're going
and
to
he
be 4 more
believed
years
that
down the
flag
road where
would
we should have been
protect him
20 years
and his
ago.
family.
And it's just,
On
and
that
then
day,
it
he
doesn't
was gunned
happen,
down
and
and
we are
shot
then
in the back.
incapable of dealing with
His
the
beloved
the,
flag
the climate and all of the
saturated
things that are
with his
coming
blood.
with it.
Absolutely, Rick. If we don't deliver
That's not talking
for working people in America, for young people
I'm
in
not too
America,
far from
for
here. I
people
can't tell you
who
how many
are,
people have
people
never
of color,
heard
and all
of
the people who
Massacre or
have stood
Ludlow
by
or you go
Joe
down the
Biden,
list of
Democratic
the
Party,
numerous massacres that
we
have
would,
happened in this
the
country
Democratic Party would
as
deserve to
companies
lose.
hired gun
But I
thugs
have hope that
and-
that will not
and-
happen.
and
I
brutes
think
to
I
beat
truly
and
do,
shoot
Rick. I
people
think we're
in
gonna
cold
pull
blood.
through this summer. I think we're gonna get something big
And yet,
done.
all of the
It's
things
gonna
that
put
they
us a
fought
long way there. The job will never be over,
All
but
of the
I have
advancements
hope, because you're right. I think
laid out
in
today.
raw politics sometimes speaks
Maximum
louder
hours,
than
minimum
the
wage
moral
laws,
crises,
safety,
and the raw politics are
pension,
right there.
the weekend,
We either see
vacation,
action or
sick
voters are
time.
gonna give the big old thumbs down.
a
Yeah,
voice
because
on
I got to
the
tell you, I saw the story out of
those
New York, and I'm going, wow. Can you imagine, if you start seeing rolling blackouts across New York?
simply take for
Can you start
granted
seeing, the Northeast,
holiest of worker
because we have, separate, separate
simply
systems
look at it
across
as another
across the
barbecue
country?
opportunity.
Can you start seeing that happen
Last
in,
weekend,
other
so-
high density areas, and the
tell you, I think
chaos
there's
that
something
comes
wrong.
with that? And
I
it's
hope over
it's
this
needless.
weekend,
I mean, we could
you will
and should have already
on
dealt
what
with this.
sacrifices
It's frustrating.
Your
I
family
don't know
may
if you
have
can
given
sense
you
my
back.
frustration,
What did your
because this is a
great-grandfather do? What did your
song that
grandfather
we've been singing for a very long time,
battles
saying,
did
"Hey,
they
this is coming. We should prepare for it," and we haven't.
Oh goodness, yeah. And it's interesting how these things are enmeshing, and some of us, you, me, others have made these connections before. The connections meaning climate change, infrastructure, inequality, worker inequality, worker injustice, racial inequality. Notice how they're coming together, and all of this is all these people who have perhaps focused on one, not the others. We're all seeing it now as one big delay that a lot of it should have been dealt with not years, but decades ago, Rick.
Yep.
Decades. And so, but the great proverb is that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
right now is when we need Congress to act and the administration to stick with it. They're in a leadership spot now. We just need them to stick with it.
I am in 100% agreement with you, and I hope folks will be calling their senators early and often, especially the handful of Democrats who have been holding up us getting things done. Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema, a couple of the other ones that. I mean, it's in this place where it should have been done already. But call early, call often. Mike, I appreciate the time, the thoughts, as always. Great stuff. I hope you'll come back and share some more with us in the future.
Anytime, Rick. Thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, man. Mike Williams, Senior Fellow there at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org, their website. We'll get links out on social media. I can check out the fabulous work they do there. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1998. If you were trying to drive to work on that Tuesday morning in Midtown Manhattan, you were probably late. 40,000 construction workers took to the streets in a massive protest. They shut down more than 200 building projects. They were rallying against the use of non-union labor. The New York Daily News declared Midtown shut down and pending projects hammered by protests. The New York Post's front page headline was Midtown Mayhem. The protest snarled traffic outside of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority on Madison Avenue. The MTA had awarded a $33 million contract to build a subway command center to a non-union employer, Roy K. Incorporated. The construction workers chose to hold their demonstration during rush hour to make the most impact. One organizer explained, "We wanted to make the biggest statement possible." The workers chanted, "What do we want? Union! When do we want it? Now!" Some of the protesters decided to march to the job site. At 10th Avenue, they were met by police in riot gear and police on horseback. One protester estimated that there were 2,000 police officers, including snipers on rooftops. Up to that point, the protest had been relatively peaceful. But then the police demanded the protesters disperse and began to spray mace into the crowd of construction workers and supporters. One protester was kicked in the head by a horse. Numerous police and protesters went to the hospital for injuries and exposure to the police mace. 38 people were rounded up and arrested. After the protest, small pickets against the MTA project continued. But the non-union contractor, who had the power of New York City Mayor Rudolph Giuliani's police force to back them up, would not be moved. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Hey you, get away from those polling places. We don't want your kind here. Scram! That's a stupid, shameful, and ultimately self-defeating political message, yet it's being pushed as the official anti-voter electoral strategy of Republicans. Admitting that they can't get majorities to vote for their collection of corporate lackeys, conspiracy theorists, and bigoted old white guys, the GOP hierarchy's great hope is to shove as many Democratic voters as possible out of our elections. They're banking on a blitz of bureaucratic bills they're now trying to ram through nearly every state legislature to intimidate, divert, and otherwise deny eligible voters their most fundamental democratic right. Their main targets are people of color, but they're also pushing to keep students, senior citizens, union households, and poor communities from voting. Unable to come up with any actual need for these autocratic restraints, the GOP vote thieves are fraudulently exclaiming that millions of illegal immigrants, dead people, Chinese, and even pets are voting. These absurd claims have been thoroughly investigated, even by Republican judges, committees, media, etc., and repeatedly they've been proven to be, well, absurd. Let's be blunt. You're more likely to find Bigfoot than you are to find a case of mass vote fraud in America. Even some GOP politicos have quit pretending that they're searching for the big cheat, instead bluntly making an overt right-wing ideological argument for subverting democracy. Everybody shouldn't be voting, explained Representative John Kavanaugh, the Republican chair of Arizona's election committee. Slipping deeper into doctrinaire doo-doo, he asserts that it's not just the number of votes that should matter in an election. We have to look at the quality of the votes, too. This is Jim Hightower saying, I'm guessing that most Democratic voters would fall into his low-quality category.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the good news today, and thank goodness for Governor Tom Wolf, the Senate rushed through Senate Bill 1300, which would have limited the mail-in ballots, which capped early voting, would have cut voter registration time. Some of the craziness that we're seeing in Georgia and elsewhere. They pushed it through, sent it to the governor's desk, and he said, no, we're not doing that here. We want people to vote. We don't want obstacles to the ballot box. And I think it's a good thing. And here to share some thoughts, I've asked Pennsylvania State Senator Art Haywood to come talk with us. Senator, thanks for taking time for us.
Sure. Thank you so much, Rick, for inviting me on.
So this was not a surprise. I think everybody knew this was going to get a veto. Thoughts?
Yes, everyone did know it was going to be vetoed. The governor announced it. We discussed it in the Senate during the debate. So it was no surprise. And also, this is a piece of legislation that had a solution looking for a problem. We had no fraud here in Pennsylvania. And so this is a lot of legislation to make it more difficult for folks to vote. And I've got a few reasons that I voted against it to share at the appropriate time.
This is one of those things where, for me, I believe that we open up the ballot box, we get more people to vote, make it easier. We have technology that we can do a whole bunch of things. But yet there are still those out there that keep saying, no, we want to stick to that Tuesday. You got to show up on that Tuesday between 7 and 7 and cast your vote. And that's how we do things. And I'm like, I'll tell you, I liked voting by mail on the last election. I requested the ballot. They sent it to me. I filled it up. I dropped it in the box. They sent me an email and said, hey, we got it. We're all good. I liked that. I thought it was a good thing.
So did I. I mean, I voted by mail as well. It was very convenient. And one of the changes that was proposed that fortunately the governor vetoed was to limit the number of drop boxes in counties. Limit the hours that you could have drop boxes, a limited days, it'd only be 7 days prior to the election. Also inconvenient. Would require having election officials at the drop boxes. And that's one of the reasons they have the limited hours. And this is just all to make it more difficult to vote. The convenience we had last time was tremendous, and it needs to remain.
Yeah. See, now, if your concern is the box is unprotected, why don't we allocate money to have someone man the box for a much longer period of time? If that's really the concern, if you really don't trust our postal service, if you really think people are dishonest, then we should allocate the resources. Because at the end of the day, the sanctity of that ballot box, what comes out of that ballot box is what the foundation of this wonderful experiment of self-rule is really all about. When you booger with that, the rest comes crumbling down.
Yes. And it also has some signature guarantee, I guess I would call it requirements for mail-in ballots. They're anticipating some kind of sophisticated technology will be able to scan the signatures that are received and determine if they match what's on your voter registration. And your voter registration may have been completed 20, 30, 40 years from the time of your then current signature. So it's very challenging. And I don't think I would trust my signature verification to a computer.
No. And I know I wouldn't, because one of the things that I know, especially I've got friends who do this for a living. In California, the number one way to have a ballot stolen is to challenge the signatures. And they throw a bunch of ballots out because, well, we couldn't match the signatures. And I'll tell you this, I don't know about you. I'm sure you have beautiful penmanship. I'm sure you have the most flowery, kind of cursive. I grew up as a kid learning to write left-handed. The nuns literally beat that out of me. So I can't write with either hand. My signature never looks the same twice. And doctors go, wow, when are you going to learn to write? I don't want someone basing my ability to vote on my chicken scratch.
Yeah. So that was one of the standards that Governor Wolf rejected, and I'm glad that he did. The other was for voter identification at the actual place of voting. And you know that some people have registered to vote You come in, you sign the book. You don't have to bring another set of signatures after the first time. Often the people who are in the voting locations overseeing the elections, they know the voters. They're their neighbors. And so further voter ID is just another barrier to getting people, making it easy to vote.
Yeah.
I think that was another reason that Governor Wolf vetoed this legislation.
What's interesting to me, Senator Haywood, is that the people that we found who committed voter fraud, the people who thought that they could put in someone else, the dead person's voter, their voting, their ballot, tended to be Republicans, the people who are pushing for this stuff. Now, look, you can say, look, we want that guy from 44 to be held accountable, and we do. We want the handful of people who have done this to be held accountable. But I got to be honest, throwing these kind of barriers up to catch a handful of people, I'm struggling with.
Yeah, and it's a tremendous challenge. This is going to make it more difficult for people to exercise the right to vote. In addition, one of the changes was to move the voter registration deadline back to 30 days. So it takes 30 days before the election, before individuals when they get cut off. The 15-day new rule really encouraged people to register to vote because sometimes, folks are really not paying attention to the election until it gets closer. So the current 15 days has made it much more possible for people to register to vote in time for the election. And we should keep in mind, there are states that have same-day voter registration.
So let me ask you this, because, good, I'm glad to hear that the governor has vetoed this. Nothing's going to change at this moment. One of the things that does concern me, and I'm not sure if you know what's going on, but I guess Pennsylvania has signed on to be one of these ERIC member states, the electronic registration information center states that from what I'm being told is kind of like the Kobach scheme to purge people off the voting rolls. Has Pennsylvania signed up for this, and are we against this? Are we for this? Where do you find yourself?
I talked to the Secretary of State, the current one who took over after the challenges with the putting the matter on the ballot. She seems very confident that this new system will help us because she indicated to me that there are several counties that are using some manual systems that are ripe for mistakes. So I currently, based upon what the Secretary of State has said to me, am cautiously optimistic that this will work and will bring some of our counties into the 21st century.
Yeah, because it's my view, honestly, to be honest, if there are dead people still on the rolls, I personally don't really care. As long as they're not voting. I mean, at the end of the day, it's who cast a ballot. That's what I'm worried about. I know there's a lot of, there are people on the voting rolls. Yeah, okay. Did they vote? That to me is the important part.
Yeah, I think it's good to have alive people on the voting rolls. So
not against it, but my fear is I see how this is played out in other places where they go, oh, well, all these people have been purged because now they're all dead. And you go knock on their door and there they are.
Yeah, that is a risk. And I have seen that examples actually in some other states. So I'm cautious that this will work. The Secretary of State that we have now, I think, is extremely competent, but that is a real concern.
Yeah.
One thing that is in the legislation was to provide for pre-canvassing so these counties can start to at least open up the envelopes a little earlier. The counties wanted 14 days to get that done. This legislation had 5 days, nothing like what the counties wanted, but we know that having the counties open up these envelopes on election day is far too late.
No, I think they should be the morning of. They should have already been counted. There should be a running tally. They should be held secret, and then the day, because we can't have another 2020 where Trump had 600,000 more votes on election night, and people, he won by a blowout when you didn't count half the people's votes, and then ultimately, unfortunately, he lost, and that. But you can't have the messaging that comes out of that. The last thing I did want to ask you about.
Confusion.
The last thing, before I let you go, the last thing I wanted to ask about is evidently you guys got some money for gun violence, about $30 million for gun violence prevention. Tell me a little bit about what that is.
very glad that we got this through the budget. And it's going to, this $30 million will go to nonprofit organizations and others that have effective programs for gun violence prevention. And there are many. Let me just highlight Ceasefire Philly. They go to the hospitals, talk to the individuals after they've been shot to prevent retaliation. Retaliation is a big source of gun violence here. And so I'm very optimistic that these organizations that have a proven track record in reducing gun violence, once we can get them the resources, we can begin to reduce it.
Yeah, have you seen what they're doing in San Jose? I mean, they're charging people who have caused damage or injury while using a gun. It seems like, putting an economic side to this, where if you use your gun, you better be ready for the fine that comes with it.
I think accountability is very important in many aspects of life, particularly here in respect to using a gun. We've got a long way to go to deal with the gun religion that is really big in Pennsylvania.
The gun religion, I like that. I call it a gun fetish. You've gone religion, I go fetish. Same kind of thing. But ultimately, we want to make sure that people are safe. And so I wanted to ask you on this. So this, because I know some of my gun friends are gonna be all freaked out that there's money going to something that has to do with guns, and it isn't giving them more. This isn't a gun grabber thing, is it?
It is not. It is all about reaching people who have a high propensity for gun violence and pulling them out, putting them into productive activities. That's one example. Some other people may use counseling, some others, different approaches to reduce gun violence. But this focuses on those who are the criminals and trying to bring them out of that life.
Well, I'm glad you got something done. I'm glad we got a budget passed. I'm glad the governor vetoed this horrible legislation. We've got so much work to do. And Art, I appreciate you taking some time, sharing your thoughts on what's going on. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Rick, and thanks for all that you do.
I appreciate your time. Our good friend, Pennsylvania State Senator Art Haywood. Look, at the end of this, the voter thing to me is really the most important part of what's going on. Make sure you're registered. Double check that as early and often. Don't let yourself be purged. While the senator thinks the Eric thing's going to be okay, I'm a little leery. Love to hear your thoughts, though. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. Listen to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1928. That was the day the state of Alabama outlawed the convict lease system that had been in practice for decades. Slave masters throughout the South had routinely loaned out enslaved people before slavery was finally abolished. The convict lease system continued this practice as the South worked to rebuild in a rush of rapid industrial growth after the Civil War. African Americans found themselves increasingly subject to sweeps by local and state authorities that coincided with harvest time or when labor agents arrived looking to man the coal mines. Many were convicted on trumped-up charges and shipped off to prison. Once there, they were leased to private industries and dispatched mostly to coal mines near Birmingham. By 1890, the state profited $164,000 a year. By 1912, prison mining brought in over $1 million in state revenues. In the PBS documentary, Slavery by Another Name, Douglas Blackman and other scholars note that prisoners could be driven in a way that earlier enslaved workers and free labor could not. Convict labor served to depress wages, curtail union activity, organizing, and strikes. These workers could also be worked practically to death and easily replaced. Progressive reformers, Socialist Party leaders, and United Mine Workers District 20 would wage an unrelenting war against the convict lease system for years. Even the 1911 Banner Mine explosion decision that killed 123 African American prisoners couldn't outlaw the practice. Finally, newly elected Governor Bibb Graves yielded to the public outcry that condemned the practice as a relic of barbarism. He also ceded to workers' demands for jobs. Graves subsequently put prisoners to work on chain gangs building roads throughout the state, making Alabama the last state to abolish the convict lease system.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the Supreme Court rejected the request from landlords to end the CDC's moratorium on evictions. That was a 5-4 decision, and I'll tell you, I was a little surprised. Little surprised. Roberts, Kavanaugh, Breyer, Sotomayor, and Kagan said no, going to keep them in place. So you had Kavanaugh going, yeah, maybe those poor people should be able to stay in their homes. I wasn't so surprised on Roberts. Kavanaugh kind of shocked me. Thought he'd have gone the other way with Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Barrett, which kick those people to the curb. I was surprised, and pleasantly. Maybe the Supreme Court on some issues isn't going to be as horrible as I thought. Some good news today. United Airlines said they're going to be buying 270 new Boeing Max jets and 70 larger A321s. Those are going to be made by Airbus, and I'm going. You know what? I'm not happy about that. But they've got the Boeing. That's going to be a lot of jobs. Going to be a good thing because you know what they're saying? People want to travel. People want to get back to life. So things picking up. Also reported that home prices are rising, fastest rise on record. April, we saw the fastest rise. Basically because there was a really tight supply and a bunch of people were going, hey, we need housing. So going in the right direction. They said that the median existing home sales price jumped in May to $350,000 for the first time. That is wow. And here's the thing. Who can afford that? I mean, who has that kind of wealth to be able to afford that? What working person? Or how far into debt do you have to get? And look, if you're a young person, how are you going to buy that first house? Because I'll tell you, we just bought a house for our oldest daughter to live in. Not cheap. And you would think your first starter house is going to be something a little more reasonable. Wow, not so much. But tight market. It is definitely a seller's market. Just don't have to buy anything on the other side. Because like I told my wife, I'd like to sell our house, but I don't want to have to buy another one. So there is that. Also, Wall Street doing very well, fat and happy. Through the first part of the year here in 2021, stocks at a record high. Now, if the last guy were still in office, we would be hearing nothing about how great it is that Boeing's going to have all these jobs. United Airlines is putting on flights. The stock market's fabulous. It's incredible. It's great. That's all we'd be hearing. But yet, all I hear from Republicans in the far right is how bad things are, how Joe Biden and the socialists are destroying things. It's incredible to me. It's like they live in an alternative reality with their alternative facts. Or they just want to be miserable and believe, oh my God, that guy is doing well. And we've got to figure out how to be miserable in those moments. But here's the thing. Republicans are in trouble because if things continue the way they're going, people's lives are getting better. Workers are getting better wages. Wall Street is fat and happy. Everyone seems to be doing better. What do you run on then? What's the argument to vote for us? And as I said the other day, what their argument has been, what their sales pitch to us has been, the socialists are coming, the critical race theory, got to throw that out. I see that a bunch of times every day. All kinds of things that divide us. Nothing to pull us together. While talking, we need bipartisanship on the federal level. All of this kind of upside down messaging And nothing more so upside down. And this got my attention. There was a legislative scorecard done by the National Association of Police Officers. This is not a polling of people's opinions. This is a prioritization of what issues are important to you. And all unions do this. They say these are the issues that we find important. This is what our legislative agenda is. This is what's going to make our job better, our life better. This is our path. So this isn't asking police how they feel about Democrats, or how they feel about Republicans, or how they feel about the squad. This is, hey, who's funding you? Who's making sure that you've got bulletproof vests? Who's making sure that your pension is secure? Who's making sure that you have health care? Who's pursuing policy, actual legislative policy to make your job and your life better? And not surprising, the Democrats scored way better on the legislative scorecard of the National Association of Police Officers, who, mind you, endorsed Donald Trump for re-election. And not just by a little bit. Kevin McCarthy got a 57% score. Elise Stefanik got a 57% score. Steve Scalise got a 50% score. Buck, Brooks, and Massey all got 43%. Now, they're your big Republican firebrands. On the Democratic side, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez got a 71%, way above McCarthy or Stefanik or Scalise. Nancy Pelosi, she got 80%, an 80% vote on the scorecard. Steny Hoyer got 86%. And guess what? This was the part that I just said, oh my goodness, even I am surprised. Because, the right, tries to demonize and vilify the squad. And the squad being Alexandria Cortez, Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Presley, that group of women. They're evil, they're bad. Tlaib, Presley, and Omar, 86% voting record for the National Association of Police Officers. Because you know what? For all of the talk of defunding the police, they're actually making sure that they're taken care of, that their pensions are taken care of, their health care is there, that they get the things that they need. Now, are they pushing for defunding some of the police? Yeah, and using those funds to do other things to make police lives easier. And if cops actually thought about what was behind the rhetoric, behind the bumper sticker, they would be in favor of it as well. But again, this is that division. This is that keeping us all bunched up and tingly in the panties and angry. When they talk about defunding the police, they think you're going to abolish the police departments. And now there are some stupid people out there that think we want to do that. We don't. But when a lot of these people talk about using funding differently, it's about bringing in social workers. It's about handling traffic stops in a different way. It's about rethinking how we do community policing. Look, I got pulled over one time. It's been a while. For my inspection was outdated, and there were literally three policemen around me. Hands on their guns, and like they'd fallen out of a war zone. And I'm like, sorry, I didn't realize that was almost a capital offense. No, had I been a black guy, maybe it would have been. But we got to do things differently. And I'm kind of surprised by this. Now, understand, you've got, McCarthy, Stefanik, Scalise, Buck, Brooks, Massey, all of these people, all these Republicans who the right says, we love the police. They drape themselves in the blue line flag, and they say how much they love the police, yet terrible voting record, and not to mention voted against the January 6th Commission. And as I said yesterday, the reality is If I was doing the crimes, if I was out there criming, I don't think I would want an investigation of my crimes. But if there had to be an investigation, I would want to be part of it so that I could, well, I don't know, redirect it in a different way. Kind of push it away from me. Maybe, save my behind. Just a thought. But going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Now, on the other side of this, our friends in the white supremacist arena, evidently the Homeland Security folks have put out a new bulletin. That bulletin warns of violent extremists who might seek to exploit easing COVID-19 restrictions, increased access to mass gatherings, and possible changes in levels of violence during the summer months to conduct attacks against a wide range of potential targets with little or no warning. What that means, crazy white people with guns and easy access to fertilizer could make our summer very interesting. And they point this out. They say racially or ethnically motivated. That's a nice way to say racist. The racially or ethnically motivated violent extremists, white supremacists, were sharing downloadable links to a publication discussing targeting mass gatherings, critical infrastructure, and get this one, law enforcement agencies. Now remember, these are the people who love the police. Remember, they were out there waving the flags of the Trump folks who love the cops, got the blue line flag flying until the police actually were doing their job, and then they stabbed them with the American flag. Yeah. Interesting times we live in. So it could be a very interesting summer. I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, our good friend Bob Ney is going to be here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, what's going on out in the great state of Ohio and beyond. A quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
The threat is salt water creeping in from the ocean further into the Delta, now threatening to contaminate freshwater supplies for central and southern California.
Worsening drought conditions threaten drinking water supplies in California. Alarming heat wave hits the Siberian Arctic. Plus, grim UN draft report warns climate change tipping points are upon us, and the worst is yet to come.
All of that grim news, as usual, straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We have spent the last 2 decades in perpetual drought here, yet almond farmers in California have doubled in that time. Despite the fact that almond production alone uses more water than all the humans and businesses in San Francisco and Los Angeles combined. That wasn't a problem back when it rained. But now there simply isn't enough water to go around, and we have to make a painful choice, getting it to the people or getting it in the nuts.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, a big chunk of the U.S. over the past week or so has been in a terrible heat wave. But we should note, it is not just affecting the U.S.
No, it is not. As we go to air, climate scientists are expressing alarm at shockingly high temperatures broiling the Arctic. An intense and expansive heat wave has gripped parts of Siberia, northwestern Russia, and Scandinavia. Ground surface temperatures across Siberia this week shot up above 90 degrees Fahrenheit and spiked as high as 118 degrees in some areas.
90 and 100 degrees in the Siberian Arctic.
118 degrees in Siberia, rivaling Las Vegas during this most recent heat wave.
Wow.
And it's not over. The National Weather Service is forecasting, quote, a new record-breaking and dangerous heat wave for the Pacific Northwest, a region where there isn't widespread air conditioning. But there's also a chance that smoke from wildfires sparked by the extreme heat conditions could help by dimming some of the sun's heat. So, yay?
Yeah, we're being saved by wildfires? Really?
A new study confirms that, yes, man-made climate change is intensifying these extreme record-breaking heat waves in the U.S.
Who could have guessed it?
A Lawrence Berkeley National Lab analysis has concluded that man-made global warming has caused these rare heat events to be 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit hotter in most of the United States. New consequences are unfolding from the climate change intensified mega drought emerging in the West. In eastern Arizona, water levels in Lake San Carlos have fallen so low that fire crews can't use it to fight fires. In Sacramento, California, cutbacks in water releases from the state's reservoirs have severely reduced river flows, which in turn is allowing salt water from the ocean to intrude inland, threatening to contaminate fresh water supplies. State water officials have hastily begun building an emergency barrier across a major waterway in the Sacramento River Delta to stop the saltwater creep, according to Ryan Reeves of the California Department of Water Resources in an interview with KCRA.
The emergency drought barrier is not one we take on lightly. I mean, it does include the word emergency in it. We consider it to be an emergency action. We would not be doing this project if it wasn't serious.
Meanwhile, a new draft report from the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change highlights that adaptation efforts are not moving fast enough. The massive draft report, obtained by Agence France-Presse and due out in 2022, is grim. It warns that the planet is rapidly approaching tipping points that could set off feedback loops that further amplify global warming, saying, quote, the worst is yet to come. Some serious climate impacts are already baked in and will hit sooner than previously projected, fundamentally reshaping life on Earth in coming decades. And that's even if nations are able to cut the greenhouse gas emissions that cause dangerous man-made climate change.
You are grim today, Desi Doyen.
It includes water shortages and crop failures, deadly heat waves, ecosystem collapse, species extinction, and rising seas inundating coastal communities. The IPCC draft report also starkly warns that efforts to adapt and prepare for climate impacts are too slow. Quote, current levels of adaptation will be inadequate to respond to future climate risks. Swedish teen climate activist Greta Thunberg, in an interview with AFP, found a ray of qualified hope.
It seems that many people are becoming more and more ready to tell it like it is. And we can, of course, not face this crisis unless we tell it like it is, unless we are adult enough to tell the truth. This could be something that could lead to something that could wake people up, which is very hopeful.
What does it say when we have to turn to Greta Thunberg for good news to cheer us up? Good Lord. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. We'll be off for a week or so until after the July 4th holiday. Please have a safe, happy, and cool one if possible. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So, Bill Cosby getting out of jail. Pennsylvania State Supreme Court overturned his conviction. No, didn't say he was innocent. Technicality. And look, you blame the DA, the Philly DA, Castor, I think his name was. He's the guy you blame for this. But I'm not getting the celebrating and spiking the football. Oh, he's free. I'm not getting that at all. He should have just quietly gone home, consider himself lucky he got away with it. Also the news today, former Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld passed away at 88 years old. So Rummy's gone. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on the top stories of the day, our good friend, former Ohio Congressman and political analyst Bob Ney. Bob, thanks for taking time for us. Helps when I put up the right slider. It's one of those things.
Rick.
It's one of those things. It's one of those days, Bob. So, thoughts on the cause getting? I wonder if he had Jello pudding when he got out.
You know how many imitations of that had to have gone on today? You know it, all over the country.
Absolutely.
You know, when this all started, with Bill Cosby and the trial and everything, they did bring up the issue right out front that he was, told that he wouldn't be, charged. I mean, this was brought up at that point in time.
Right.
And it was just sort of, skirted over. So what has ended up happening is that, they've made a decision based on what he actually was told.
No.
Or they wouldn't have done it.
No, I don't disagree with it. I think the court did the right thing. The theory that I learned, and maybe I'm wrong now after all these years, but our Constitution is written in such a way that 1,000 guilty men go free, that one innocent man go to jail. So one of the 1,000 guilty men went free.
Right, because in his case, they can maybe retry him in a different type of counts. Because they've mentioned that in the article. But the bottom line of this one, no matter if, I think he's guilty, but the bottom line of it is that as long as the prosecutor's system is allowed to do things, and then we say, well, he's guilty, so we're going to ignore what the error they made. As long as that happens, it's just not good for justice, period.
Nope.
So, the system worked, but the results aren't good.
That's where my mind was. Look, it is. Right. It is what it is. And for those who are crying and screaming that the guy did 3 years, that's more than I ever thought he was going to get.
Right. That's true.
So there is. Any thoughts on Rummy's passing?
Yes. I was in meetings with Rumsfeld. In fact, we got into a big debate in the Speaker's office in a private meeting with about 8 people because he was doing some things. His generals were saying some things dealing with this group. It was at Camp Ashraf. It's a big, long story, but it was a dissident group called the Mujahideen Khalq that were in a camp in Iraq and had helped produce the ability to kill some Iranians and help with the gassing, etc., during the war. And at that time, Rumsfeld's general had praised them as a great freedom group. And these were people who the Mujahideen Khalq had assassinated Americans, and they were the ones responsible for leading the charge to take our Americans as hostage. Make a long story short, I brought this up to him, and he pounded his fist down on the desk, and I remember he said, I'll just go after him. And of course he didn't. And one thing we would note in Wiki, if you read what he said about this 25-year fallacy about him, is supporting Saddam Hussein on weapons, and he argued that all the time. And there was a release of a classified series of documents, and those were released, and it in there clearly says that the details embarrassed Rumsfeld because it clearly said that on behalf of the Reagan administration that they were encouraging Saddam Hussein to develop them, and also we provided conventional military equipment, and also we allowed the export of biological agents, including anthrax and vital ingredients for chemical weapons.
Yep.
Period. And that's what, he denies that it happened. It's in the unclassified reports. And, he was a war hawk. I mean, if you look at his career, he was a congressman, defense secretary twice, actually the youngest twice, and had a great career along those lines. But he's going to be known for, trying to cover up Abu Ghraib. He, went along with, all the types of things you've got with the Alberto Gonzales regime,
Yep.
And Alice Fisher, I wrote about her in my book because I had my days with her, and she was sent in to cover up the waterboarding. It was just a whole series of very sordid things that we did as a country under his time.
Yeah, sadly, sadly we didn't stop him before he did all the damage. But may he rest.
Yes.
Let's move along. The January 6th Commission vote today happened, right? 2 Republicans voted for it.
Right.
Cheney and Kinzinger, right?
Right. Exactly. I thought there would be more because the conservatives were actually talking about the fact that you need to get down to the bottom of what happened, in the Capitol security system. So I actually was a little surprised, Rick. I thought there'd be more.
I did too. I thought I thought
really
Fitzpatrick here in Pennsylvania would have voted for it.
I thought that there'd be more because, again, the conservative caucus made comments, putting aside the fact that Trump didn't do anything, but they were making comments, about security of the Capitol. Again, this should have been a commission on January 7th. It went through the whole system, and we're here. Okay, now heading into July. So, okay, finally they did it, and go ahead and find out, what happened, where the weak points were, and how to correct it.
Yes, and I also understand that Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, they want to be on the panel.
Really? Okay. I shouldn't have laughed, but I did. I'm going to. Yes,
that is the right response.
What am I saying? I'm not sitting there going, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, but here's the problem with Greene. Give you an example. Guess we won't even go there, but here's the problem with Greene. It would be one thing, if somebody that is on that panel says, I don't believe that Trump was the match, that caused the people to go down there. And then they focused on, the security issues and what happened in the groups and et cetera. But she won't do that. She will be endlessly on one thing, if she's on there.
Yeah, and I'm waiting for them. I'm actually waiting for this to go full circle and them to deny it ever happened.
Right.
What are you talking about? That never happened.
They were tourists.
They were tourists.
Yes, just trying to take a little tour, here and there, go into some of the areas that tourists can't even normally go. That's all.
Right. So let me ask you, you were the head of the Capitol Police at one point while you were in Congress. Did anyone defecate on the floor? Did anyone urinate on the speaker's desk? Did that happen during your tenure? Did the tourists get that kind of access?
Nothing that we know of that any of the tourists did that, no, nothing of that nature happened.
Crazy.
This was the largest, let's frame it as it is. This was the most vicious and largest attack on the Capitol since the British burnt the Capitol.
Yep.
If you look at the history of the Capitol, now we had a plane that was headed there from Pennsylvania, which went down, with the United flight, right? We had that. We had anthrax introduced into the House and Senate complexes. So we had situations like that. But this is actually the second worst attack on the Capitol in our history, right after the British burn it.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of history that we forget.
Millions of dollars of damage, weapons, you name it, destruction. It happened. Right. So it happened. Nobody. It's like denying. It's like it'd be like denying that the Holocaust existed. Well, we're going to deny that anybody did any damage to the Capitol.
Yep. No, that's where I went there. I go. These are the same people denied the Holocaust deniers or any of that. Going this route. So it's possible. I'm waiting for that to come about. But you bring up the fact that this is the worst attack on the country since or the Capitol since the British burnt down the White House. But we have Confederate statues still in the Capitol. Yesterday they voted to remove them. I'm of the mindset, why were Confederate statues in our Capitol to begin with?
Well, on this one, it's interesting the way I'm taking a look at this one. First of all, the statue's going, that's fine, But what happened in the Capitol, you have two ways that you get statues. I commissioned a Rosa Parks statue. I put it through House administration. Jesse Jackson Jr. came to me and asked for that statue. Now, that is a House ability to say we're going to have a statue. We did Helen Keller and, Rosa Parks. So we can do that. That's a House commissioned within. Senate can do it, too. And it doesn't happen all the time. The second way is that the states send two statues, to the Capitol, and then we open some rules, I can't remember what year, to say you can replace the statues you sent. So the states all knew. Now, there are, if you look at the list of states that are right now, trying to send new statues or commissioning, there's a fairly extensive list. So on this case, the states themselves could have removed a statue that they put out there, and they chose not to. Some of the busts and things, though, Rick, were commissioned by the Capitol itself, whatever reason, years ago they were commissioned.
Yeah, I get that, but why? I still coming back to why would we allow that to go into the Capitol when the Confederates didn't get to the Capitol? It's one of those historical things that I used to argue even back in history class in 8th grade. Why are we learning about the people who wanted to tear the country apart? And I remember going to Gettysburg in 8th grade. And the history, the history teacher was like, this is great. This is where this battle. He knew everything, and I'm going, but these people were traitors.
Mm-hmm.
That's just.
Yeah, they've had them there. It's been, I do a radio station or two in Tennessee, and this actually came up today, and the guy that has the radio show, doesn't support the idea of the Confederacy or anything, but he said, because we were talking about this today, and he said it was so ingrained down there that even if they didn't support slavery, they still had the feeling of this history that Robert E. Lee was their history, and they would have statues, and that's what he was saying today.
Yeah, and this is where you teach history accurately. History is he was a traitor. History is he wanted to destroy the country. I learned of him. My teacher taught me he was a great general. That was first, and then a traitor second. Mm-hmm. So there's where you want.
Interesting.
Yeah, it is what it is. I did want to ask you about this. I guess another 29 guys are suing Ohio State University over this Dr. Richard Strauss, who died back in 2005. It's like more than like 400 now. It's up to that this guy was I don't know what they're accusing him of doing, sexual assault of some or abuse is what they're saying. But you got 400 people now coming forward.
Right. It was just announced in Associated Press. 29 more men, as you just stated, were suing Ohio State University, and it's over their failure to stop him. It would have been one thing if it wasn't known, but we all know it was known. And what they say is that over some of the guys have said over a period of 10 or 11 or 12 exams, he would abuse them. And it started when that they were wrestlers on campus, and they would get their physicals with him. So then it's up to, and by the way, one wrestler argues that he was molested on 50 medical visits. And they didn't keep quiet on 50 medical visits, but they had to keep going to him. So somebody inside obviously protected him. And more than 400 alumni of Ohio State have raised similar allegations against the university.
Yeah, because I can't imagine that not being something that wrestlers and football players are going, hey, whoa, wait a second.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Now, I remember, when I was in school, you'd line up for your physicals, and the doctor would come in and basically feel you up and do the turn your head and cough thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they do that anymore, but I'm going, we used to go, hey, wait a minute. And we used to talk about and joke about. I can't imagine this kind of abuse not being known.
Well, I think what's going to eventually come out, although I will tell you, this has went on, for quite a long time talking about this.
Yeah.
So OSU has apologized to anyone in generic terms that Dr. Strauss, harmed and molested. And they've reached about, I think it's $47 million in settlements with 185 people so far. And now they're announcing they're going to do an individual settlement program. I think they have claims from, maybe 10 more lawsuits, and there'll be more. but somebody obviously had to have just continued to allow him to do this. And I don't think that a lot of the guys at the time, they were 16, 17, 19 years old, I don't think they probably at that time would have publicly said, hey, this happened to me, but privately they had to have told. And I think that's what's going to be found out, through the system of people who knew.
Yeah, I can't imagine. That's just horrible. But then again, this kind of stuff has happened. Where I went to school, we had an athletic director who my mother had warned me about when I was a kid, that there are these creeps out there, and Hank Joy was his name. He was the athletic director of the high school for forever, and he eventually someone came forward, and when that one kid came forward, the floodgates opened. Right. And there were hundreds of people that came forward from like 50 years from multiple states because he had been getting away with it for so long. And everybody knew it was the open, dirty secret, but nobody did anything about it until that one kid filed the police report. And then he ended up going to jail for a bit of time. And when he got out of jail, he got a job as the activities coordinator at Palmerdale, which was the boys' juvenile correction facility, which is just, again, crazy.
Right, and then there's been people that, they somehow stay in the system, just like the guy you just mentioned. They somehow stay in the system, and it's, I don't know, somebody turns their head to it, or it's not, told out front.
Yeah, it's crazy. But it is what it is. But, Bob, I appreciate the time and the thoughts. Good stuff as always.
Thank you.
Our good friend Bob Ney. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1885. That was the day that streetcar workers went out on strike. The West Division Street Railroad Company had reduced the number of trips it made each day. The workers asked for a wage increase to make up for the loss of earnings. In response, management fired 15 union leaders. Outraged members of the city's labor movement rallied to the cause of the West Side Streetcarmen's Benevolent Association. Thousands of Chicagoans lined the company's tracks. Calls went out to revoke the company's charter. Mayor Harrison urged the company not to try and run their cars in the charged environment. But the company's management refused to listen. They demanded police protection to get their streetcars running. A police captain by the name of John Bonfield was assigned the task. Bristling with policemen, 10 streetcars rolled out into the crowd. Under Bonfield's orders, the police clubbed strikers and protesters along the tracks. When a group of bricklayers yelled rats at the passing cars, they were arrested. In all, 150 protesters went to jail that day. After 7 days, the strike ended in a compromise. The workers saw an increase in their wages, and all but 2 of the workers who had been fired got their jobs back. The action propelled Captain Bonfield's career as a strikebreaker. He became known as Captain Blackjack Bonfield. It was Captain Bonfield who led the police confrontation with workers at a rally the next year that sparked the Haymarket tragedy.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So Republicans more than upset over the fact that Joe Biden wants to spend a little money on investing in the IRS to go after tax cheats They are not pleased. Biden wants to spend $40 billion to increase the IRS's ability to go get, well, they're saying upwards of $700 billion in taxes. They believe they're going to help at least $100 billion, but possibly up as much as $700 billion. Ted Cruz came out and said, throwing billions more taxpayer dollars at the IRS will only hurt Americans struggling to recover after waves of devastating lockdowns. He says, instead of increasing funding for the IRS, we should abolish the damn place. Yeah, so everyone can cheat like a billionaire. And then we get no infrastructure. We get nothing done. And, well, you know, hey, wait a second. Maybe that wouldn't be a bad idea. Then we couldn't pay Ted Cruz. Maybe he'd go away. Marsha Blackburn said a $40 billion increase in funding the IRS will lead to a huge potential for abuse. You know, this is hearkening back to the right-wing screed about how the IRS was targeting conservative groups, which was complete nonsense. They were targeting people who were cheating because they targeted progressive and liberal groups too. But she went on to say bigger government results in more waste, fraud, and abuse. Yeah, we shouldn't collect the taxes owed by rich people because we'll just waste it. You know, like on things like infrastructure and fixing buckled roads and fixing, you know, the electric lines that are melting. You know, little wasteful things like that. And Lindsey Graham, one of my favorites, he says, a lot of this is pie in the sky. There are some people on our side who don't like empowering the IRS. I don't mind empowering the IRS if it's a reasonable thing to do, but I mean, how much uncollected taxes can you gather with $40 billion? I don't know where to go with that. You hire more people to go through really complicated tax returns. Look, I'm virtually nobody. My tax return is like 100 pages long. It's insane what my accountant has to jump through. And I make sure I pay every penny, and I choose not to take a bunch of deductions because I don't want to get audited. If there were the chance that billionaires were going to get audited, do you think that they would go, maybe we won't ask for things that we're not entitled to? You know, like housing credits that are for working class people when you're a billionaire. I don't know. Seems like something that they might not do once someone's actually paying attention. But this starving of the IRS has been going on, well, since 2010. In fact, they say that they've cut the IRS's budget by about 20% since 2010. We'll see how it plays out. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, ricksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go, wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.